This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, truth seekers and true crime junkies. Nanette is back with another episode. A little bit of housekeeping here. We're going to jump back to the presentation really quick here and talk about some research or some additional information that I found. Let's go into that presentation now. It looks like we, or at least I had placed Jack in Llano, Texas after he had left GE at the end of 1963. Information is suggesting that he had possibly moved to Austin, Texas and not to Llano. So I do have information in regards to him being in Llano, though I'm not sure how correct that information is because it kind of conflicts with some testimony that's been given or some information that has been given by family members. But we'll cover that as we go through it. I also did want to mention that I do have a message board or a forum where a lot of this information has been put up in regards to research, letters that have been worked on, techniques that have been used by other people to attempt to solve or decode things. That can be found at https:// Nanette, B as in Bartow, /forum, FORUM, chit chat, CHITCHAT.com/categories. Sorry, you'll be able to find all different types of unsolved murders there that we have worked on in relation to Jack's proximity and what we believe he might have been capable of doing or where he might have been at the time and why he might or should be investigated as a possible suspect for those crimes. So I wanted to take a look at and see where in relation to the happenings of JFK, which happened or occurred in Dallas, Texas, as everyone knows. If Jack had moved to Llano, Texas, he would have been somewhere in this proximity, and it would have been approximately 4 hours and 38 minutes from the Dallas area. Obviously not too far away, considering if he's not in California committing crimes, then we have to consider what he's doing in Texas. I did run another check just to see where Austin would have fallen into play. So Austin was one of the places that he was indicated to have moved back to in 1963, and that he had also purchased a mobile home and he had placed it here in Dale, Texas. I do know that this address at Dale, Texas, where this mobile home went up, was his mother's address for pretty much the rest of her life. So many of the things that we see that had Jack's address listed as Dale, Texas was merely because he had owned it and his mother was living there. Though I do have evidence that supports that he had gone back from time to time, obviously to visit. And then, of course, there was a period or a stint where he went to take care of his mother and actually lived with his mother. So back and forth between Austin and Dale. Last week, I did have the opportunity to speak with my friend Reno, who had indicated he wasn't quite sure how I had connections with the mob and with Canada and with a few other things. So I thought I would do a little more research, bring that back to us and see, or at least show why I believe there was some type of connection. So obviously we finished off talking about Carlos Marcello last week and his running of the New Orleans, Louisiana mob and outfit. And he had hubs in Dallas, Texas. And he had hubs in Chicago as well. So the reason why I brought this one to play is because New Orleans is the first place we saw one of these letters with the symbol of the zodiac. So I thought it was rather interesting in that maybe Jack had copied something like this. However, it is a good possibility that he fell in with the same group, and that is where this particular symbol came from. Either way, this note here was left in regards to or attached to a dead man's body, Bob Lord, in 1934. Of course, I'm not accusing Jack of doing this because he was far too young at that stage to have been part of it. But Sylvester Sam Carolla ruled New Orleans at this time, and first note that we see with the zodiac symbol on it. It is a mob-related death. Then in 1947, Marcello takes over when Carolla is deported to Sicily. So we know that Jack in 1945 to 1946 and 47 likely was in the Chicago area. He was a bootlegger, which also has relations to the mob as well. It looks like the Italian mob is in the Chicago or Texas at the right time, since Marcello runs Dallas, Chicago, and Las Vegas and New Orleans. The underground and syndicate is often written by the suspect in this particular case, so we're going to see that being mentioned a lot inside of his letters, almost as if to state that he was part of something that was much larger than him, that was really controlling him. The mob was divided into two in Chicago, with one running the north and one running the south. These were the Italian and the Irish mob. The self-description of the suspect is Irish, but this may be a ploy to distract from the truth, and Marcello is the Italian mob. So our mob connection really comes in with Jack floating around and his proximity to these particular areas, what was going on, what he chose for work, things like that. So looking into, well, I had made the comment before that Carlos Marcello, being part of the mob, also had CIA affiliates. And so when I ran just a quick check on CIA, hypnosis, I came up with these interesting articles in regards to the CIA, hypnosis, and cocaine, the invisible pilot. So here might be the reason why we're seeing a lot of aviators and pilots involved that are being accused of possibly being associated with the CIA, flying for them, and that was likely to bring in drugs, guns, and other things to inner cities in the United States. I also found one that was interesting, the effects of hypnosis on remote viewing. So if you've not ever heard of remote viewing, it's a very interesting program ran by the government where they would have individuals here, basically like psychics, I guess, if you will, that would be able to see things in other countries and literally plot them out on paper, give a complete description. That way they could, I guess, send in troops or send in some type of resource to take over that particular facility, especially if it had any type of military, oh gosh, I'm going to lose a word for this, but if they had the ability to attack another country or another location, then of course we would have that information. Now, I know that sounds a little far-fetched, especially when most of us don't believe in psychics, but I do believe there is a point in our brain that we are not accessing, and things that we do know, that little voice inside our head telling us what to do, however, not quite as in-depth or what would you would expect to see out of that particular type of program. I did actually find it in the movie Suspect Zero. I thought was extremely interesting. The entire premise is based off of the remote viewing, and it's basically about an FBI agent who is remote viewing other serial killers, tracking them down and killing them. And in the process of this, the head FBI agent that is hunting down this particular suspect who is killing the serial killers is actually being inducted into the program, and himself begins to remote view serial killers and chasing them himself. Now, I know in the special features of this, they actually have the military program where the person who headed it or was brought in to train for that particular program actually speaks briefly in regards to it, kind of gives a presentation on how the remote viewing occurs and gives you a sample of it. So evidently this program was very real real. Check it out. Suspect Zero, very good movie. I'd say in the first hour of that movie, I had probably logged at least 2 pages of notes and how that related to Jack Terrence and what he was a part of. Carlos Marcello was, like I said, not a CIA member, as I had indicated before, but he did have CIA contacts. The name I was actually looking for was David Morales, which headed the Hypnosis for Hire program in Nevada. And we know that Jack consistently returned to Nevada under the guise that he was gold panning and selling the gold. I think there was a lot more going on there, whether or not it was him selling the actual gold pieces or jewelry that he stole from his victims, or whether or not he was up there for another means altogether that we're completely unaware of. Either way, we will see a gold panning greeting card that comes out of the Zodiac case to law enforcement and to the newspapers. So we'll see that gold panning in Nevada tie in at that point. So also the Canada connection. So it was the mom in Canada, and how did we come up with a murder in Canada? Obviously so far away from anything else that was going on. So I put together some information in regards to that. The Office of Strategic Services, we talked about this early on, developed by Roosevelt in the early 40s for World War II. It was the intelligence agency of the United States during that time. The OSS was formed as an agency of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for all branches of the United States Armed Forces. So Jack very well could have become a part of it. The individuals who were recruiting for this program were actually looking for people just like Jack, wayward individuals, extremely intelligent, that could win a bar fight. Other OSS functions included the use of propaganda, subversion, and post-war planning. The OSS was dissolved a month after the end of the war. Intelligent tasks were shortly later resumed and carried out by its successors, the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and the Independent Central Intelligence Agency. So we're going to bring back in the CIA. On December 14th of 2016, the organization was collectively honored with a Congressional Gold Medal. I'm not quite sure why, but some of the things that I did discover while I was doing this research is that they had a camp called Camp X near Whitby, Ontario in Canada. It was an assassination and elimination camp, a training program that was operated by the British Special Operations Executive, assigning exceptional masters in the art of knife-wielding combat. I bring that up because obviously the Zodiac killer was very astute with a knife. A lot of these murders that we've seen so far did indeed include a knife, especially these early on ones where there was overkill with the knife. And one of the more interesting uses of the knife was the 3.5 inch by 1/2 inch blade, where we have at least 3 females that were stabbed directly in the heart. They appeared to have passed out by the passerbys or the people who were around them. They were completely unaware that the individual had been stabbed because little to no blood had seeped out. So until the individual was actually checked out, it wasn't known that they had actually been stabbed. It happened so quick and so easy. This, to me, tells me somebody has had ample training to be able to walk up, stab precisely where they need to stab, puncture the heart, kill the person, walk away without anybody even being able to identify them. So many members of the Office of Strategic Services also were trained there. It was dubbed the School of Mayhem and Murder by George Hunter White, who trained at the facility in the 1950s. Now, I know we've talked about George Hunter White as it applies to the MK Ultra program, and we know that he headed that in San Francisco. It was extremely interesting to me as I was making this connection to the Canada murder to this particular school, because if we look at it, the Canada murder of the little girl on the handlebar of the bicycle occurred here in Vanastra, right next to Clinton Air Force Base. And then, of course, as you climb down here, 2 hours and 37 minutes away, you will find Whitby, and Whitby, Ontario is where this murder and mayhem training occurred. So, George Hunter White then went on to head the MK Ultra in San Francisco. I do believe that he started with MK Ultra in New York. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that my memory of the research was correct and that he was brought in from New York, which would place him closer to this particular area in Canada. So basically, coming from the East Coast back to the West Coast in order to head that program, basically. So another of the MK Ultra sub-projects, Operation Midnight Climax, consisted of the web of CIA-run safe houses in San Francisco, Marin, and New York. Now, we will see one of the letters from the Zodiac era that speaks about Marin. So Marin may have been where he operated out of under this particular program, but there were safe houses in San Francisco, and we did show how Jack was within 7 to 10 miles of those safe houses. And of course, New York, which were established to study the effects of LSD on unconsenting individuals. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to the safe houses where they were surreptitiously plied with a wide range of substances, including LSD, and monitored behind one-way glass. So evidently, George Hunter White was a bit of a voyeur, and he enjoyed sitting behind that glass and watching what was going on. Kind of sick. Anyways, several significant operational techniques were developed in this theater, including extensive research into sexual blackmail. That's where I talk about the socialites that were part of the MK Ultra program. Their goal was to get into bed with high-ranking officials and leaders and to basically soak information out of them that could be used by others. So aside from the sexual blackmail, there was surveillance technology and the possible use of mind-altering drugs in field operations. In 1957, with funding from a CIA front organization, Donald Ewan Cameron of the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, began MK Ultra Sub-Project 68. We're going to get to that here in a second and see how that relates to everything else. But that also drives us right back into Canada once again with the Allen Memorial Institute. We are also going to see Allen used as a ploy in some of the letters that were sent as a willing or unwilling accomplice to some of the crimes that we believe that Jack has perpetrated. So basically, his experiments at this hospital were designed to first de-pattern individuals, erasing their minds and memories, reducing them to the mental level of an infant, and then to rebuild their personality in a manner of his choosing. Now, I say this because I've always believed that that's what the military did in general. They are going to tear you down and build you back up just the way they want you. So this did not surprise me to see that this is what they were attempting to do, to see if they could overall control an individual by breaking their mind and then building that mind back again. To achieve this, Cameron placed patients under his care into drug-induced comas for up to 88 days and applied numerous high-voltage electric shocks to them over the course of weeks or months, often administering up to 360 shocks per person. He would then perform what he called psychic driving experiments on the subjects, where he would repetitively play recorded statements such as, "You are a good wife and mother, and people enjoy your company," through speakers he had implanted into blacked out football helmets that he bound to the heads of his test subjects for sensory deprivation purposes. Absolutely insane, the things they were capable of getting away with just because these people were mental patients in a hospital. So in one case, Cameron forced a person to listen to a message nonstop for 101 days. Using CIA funding, Cameron converted the horse stables behind Allen Memorial into an elaborate isolation and sensory deprivation chamber where he kept patients locked in for weeks at a time. Cameron also induced insulin comas in his subjects by giving them large injections of insulin twice a day for up to 2 months at a time. Some of this stuff is absolutely horrendous, and they say that this was in an attempt to be able to have the hand up over other countries during the war. And I just don't understand how this is something that they could perpetrate on the American public. Well, obviously, in this particular case in Canada, maybe it's okay there. I don't know. Either way, when I actually ran the map just to see how all of this worked out, we can see that the CIA ran the Allen Memorial Institute with the MK Ultra program up here in Montreal. The Canadian forces are actually right here somewhere in between these, and they are in Trenton, Canada, which Trenton is one of those places or names that come up a lot in the communications. Terry Batcher, one of the individuals that we'd spoken to not too long ago, had indicated that he was finding several of these Trenton hits throughout the communications, which I knew of several of them, including as early as Black Dahlia, but they do continue all the way out, I believe, until 2006. The next location we have is the OSS CIA, which is operating in Whitby. Where are we at? Which would be generally located in the Toronto area of Canada. And then, of course, Banastra, Ontario, where the 1959 murder of Cheryl Lynn Harper is committed near Clinton Air Force Base. So we do have some relation to that Canada murder, some of the operations that were occurring, I believe, around Jack and that Jack was involved with. And we do see letters that refer to a hospital in Canada, which we will talk about at a later time. So the Allen Memorial Institute, Psychiatric Hospital and Research Institute, where MK Ultra, aka Operation Midnight Climax, began in 1957. So just 2 short years after MK Ultra and Midnight Climax had picked up in the San Francisco area, they had began operating in Canada. The Dear Draft Board letter, which was one of the ones I talked about being or speaking about Marin and the Bay Area, written from a mental hospital. My theory is a veterans hospital, since many of the crimes take place near these types of hospitals. The D.B. Cooper letter, as I indicated, alluded to hospitality, with hospital being in capital letters and the ITY of that word in lowercase, which might give one a clue or a hint that he was in a hospital after the jump, may have injured himself on when he jumped out of the plane. So took himself out of the country to another location to go to the hospital so he wouldn't be considered a suspect in that crime. And then, of course, the anthrax sender return address appears to be a school in Canada from a 4th grader. And I know that the 4th grader is a little bit relative to many of the individuals that we have, or individuals, but children that we have that are murdered in this case, anywhere between the ages of 8 and 12, possibly 14 years of age, but still within all that elementary school time frame. So that brings us into the actual JFK assassination at Daley Plaza in Texas. I don't believe that Jack was one of the shooters, so we're not going to get onto that foot of, I believe that the JFK assassination is involved with the Zodiac killer, though we do know that the Zodiac killer wrote in regards to it, having information in regards to it. And that's what I question, is how does Jack have any information in regards to the JFK murder unless he's in the know? I think that for the most part, what I'm going to go on about is more about what Carlos Marcello was doing and the assassination, or the relation that people believe Carlos Marcello has in regards to the assassination of the president. And that was more or less just because of the information, like I said, how it revolved around where we knew Jack was, what he might be involved with. So a little bit of information. Well, and I also do think that there's a possibility that Jack could have been involved with the shooting of Officer Tibbetts. I think we spoke about that briefly, but we can see that he was literally a doppelganger for JFK, and very, very similar in appearance. He was sitting in a parked police car outside of Oswald's home. The story goes, or at least they'd like us to believe, is that Oswald came upon him and shot him parked in his car. I tend to think that it was a little bit different, and there is some information that can be found out there in regards to the belief of the landlady who was actually renting a room to Oswald that would suggest that it was not Oswald that actually shot this officer parked out there. But a little more information in regards to Carlos Marcello. It says at the start of 1920s, marijuana use in America was concentrated in New Orleans, and its intoxicating vapors were mainly inhaled by migrant workers from Mexico. So I have 2 points there. Number one is that marijuana, we do know that in 1963, it is stated that Jack, when he left GE and moved back to Texas, that he had first went to Oklahoma. When I questioned Dennis Kaufman in regards to Oklahoma, he had indicated that that's where Jack would go to pick up marijuana to distribute. So he would occasionally make these trips back to Oklahoma, pick up the marijuana, bring it back to wherever he was, and then sell it. So the other part of that, obviously, is the relation to Mexico, because we see that there's a lot of reference to going to Mexico, things happening in Mexico. CIA operatives being seen in Mexico, members of the mob being seen in Mexico when they were evading U.S. Indictments and arrest warrants. So along with Jazz, pot traveled north to Chicago. Again, that puts it back in Jack's area, and then east to Harlem, where it soon became an indispensable part of the music scene, even entering the language of the black hits of the day. So a squat but muscular fireplug of a man, rising New Orleans mobster Carlos Marcello was perfectly placed to make boatloads of money from illegal marijuana shipped into his territory. In 1938, though, Marcello sold 23 pounds of pot to an undercover agent, convicted and sentenced to 1 year for 23 pounds of pot. We have people for an ounce of pot that are just now getting released because the jails are too full. But this man, 23 pounds of pot to an undercover agent, convicted and sentenced to 1 year in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Marcello was also fined more than $75,000 using his political influence. So again, we're tying back the mob to politics. It seems like they're one and the same, and the CIA is their watchdogs, if you will, the ones perpetrating the things that we can't openly in America without being found doing illegal things upon American constituents. So using his political influence, that particular reefer man, as they called him, was able to get the fine reduced to just $400. If my life was only so lucky. And he was out of prison in 9 months. So literally did almost no time for it, paid little to no money for it, and was out and about to continue on with his business. With the Louisiana mafia boss Sam Carolla pulling the strings, Governor O.K. Allen, a former stooge of assassinated Senator Huey Long, provided the leniency. So that's interesting. So we have another Allen reference, and that may be another thing that we see ongoing in these crimes and communications. But Allen keeps tying back into what we're seeing. So legend has it that Marcello eventually had a tailor sew a foot-long pocket into the left leg of his trousers, which he would stuff with cash as he made his rounds through Jefferson Parish, paying off the police one by one. So now we have the police involvement along with the mob. So from pot dealing, police and politician corrupting street thug, Marcello graduated to Godfather of New Orleans and Dallas, governing a vast and violent criminal empire that brought in an estimated $2 billion a year. He succeeded Sam Carolla, who was deported to Sicily in 1947. Marcello quickly became a generous financial supporter of Richard Nixon. So we're going to find some Richard Nixon involvement, because I believe that many of the crimes or the cases of serial killings occurred almost as a deflection to have us looking one direction because politicians are doing something in the other direction. So in the case of Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal, we found that while the Watergate happenings were occurring in Atlanta, Georgia, we also had a serial killing spree at the same exact time. So Marcello's first dealings with Vice President Dick Nixon involved Jimmy Hoffa. We all know where that one went, the mobbed up Teamster union leader. I did just watch a movie yesterday in regards to it was called The Irishman, and it kind of gives you a nice little breakdown of how the politics, the mob, and the police were all kind of in cahoots with one another. I am not going to state that that has absolutely changed, because we know there are still bad people out there in every industry, and there are chances that we are still seeing some of these cases that are not being solved being controlled by the same means. In my mind, there's somebody still alive that has a huge interest in seeing this not close, because it could cause some very bad publicity for them. Either way, because Jimmy Hoffa shared a common enemy with Nixon, or I'm sorry, because Jimmy, who are we looking at here? They must have misprinted that. common enemy with Nixon, which was Hoffa and his 2 million member union, backed Nixon against Senator John Kennedy in the 1960 presidential election. A Louisiana Teamster official who later became a government informant has revealed that Hoffa met with Marcello to secretly fund the Nixon campaign with stacks of cold mob cash. Edward Parton told mob expert Dean Moldea, "I was right there listening to the conversation. Marcello had a suitcase filled with $500,000 cash, which was going to Nixon." So, of course, they are attempting to put who they want in office that they think are going to be better from them. What I did kind of take from the movie The Irishman, or the happenstances, and I'm going to have somebody who is really astute in our political history here in a couple weeks as a guest, was more or less that the backing and the voting in of John F. Kennedy was because they believed he had some particular relationship with Cuba that would allow them to get back into Cuba and bring back their casinos and start making the money they were used to making out there. And unfortunately, that was not something that John F. Kennedy was capable of doing. So while they did everything they could to get him in office to ensure that they would make it back into Cuba, that is not what happened. And I'm not going to say that that is one of the reasons why he was assassinated, because there are so many other reasons, like putting a price cap on steel and wood and things that are in huge big business or big industry that kind of put a cap on the money these individuals can make, and they were very upset about that. So I've seen things with unions and big business that all were kind of on the boat of, like, we've got to get JFK out there because he's way too good for this country. He's looking out for us, basically. So let's see here. Within a few weeks of that payoff, Vice President Nixon managed to stop a Florida land fraud indictment against Hoffa. Very interesting that all of these individuals seem to be being pardoned. And we're going to talk about some of the cases in which political pardons have occurred for individuals that were either suspects or thought to be suspects in the crimes that were committed, that I believe Jack committed, that somebody else was actually hemmed up for. The Hoffa-Marcello meeting took place in New Orleans on September 26th of 1960 and has been verified by William Sullivan, a former top FBI official. Senator John Kennedy edged out Vice President Nixon in the 1960 presidential election, and Hoffa, thanks to Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was soon sitting in a prison cell for jury tampering and looting his own union's pension funds of nearly $2 million. Though if you watch the movie, it indicates everybody who was in charge of this particular union was willy-nilly just loaning money out, and I'm sure that is so that they could make high interest on it to make more money for, I'd say, for the union. I wasn't sure that he was actually using or looting it for personal use as much as they were asserting that he had used the money to give loans to other mobsters and other outfits to build buildings, build casinos, to do things of that nature. So the Nixon-Hoffa link remained solid at least until December 23rd of 1971, when as president, Nixon gave Jimmy an executive grant of clemency and opened the prison gates for him. So again, we see another mobster, another criminal, another underground syndicate being played favorites to and getting out of prison when he rightly should not have, especially if he did half the stuff that movie indicated that he did. So in 1961, Marcello was deported to Guatemala by Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, but the Louisiana Godfather quietly returned in a small plane piloted by an associate named David Ferry. We're also going to see how David Ferry wraps himself around these particular cases and other instances as we go through here. Later considered a prime suspect in the JFK assassination by the New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. I don't have any information to suggest that's true. Again, this is not a crime that I followed. It's just research that popped up as I was typing in keywords, and some of those things happen to actually revolve right around what Jack was doing. In 1967, just as Garrison prepared to indict him, Ferry was found dead in his apartment. Wow, not a shocker. Loose ties seem to be something really big in the mob area, and not just loose ties, but if you did wrong by them, they did not just kill you, they killed you, your family, and anybody associated with you, which may be why we see so many murders in the Kennedy family. So in 1967, just as Garrison prepared to indict him, Ferry was found dead in his apartment. He was lying on a sofa with a sheet pulled over his head. Interesting. 2 typed suicide notes were found. Ferry's name was typed, not signed on each note, which probably indicates that somebody else typed those letters up for him. But how can you commit suicide and then cover yourself up with a sheet? No one will ever know. New Orleans Metro Crime Commissioner Director Aaron Kahn believed Ferry was murdered. I'm going to say that's a good guess. But the New Orleans coroner officially reported that the cause of death was a cerebral hemorrhage. Okay. Garrison's investigators had learned that Ferry, shortly before the JFK assassination, had deposited $7,000 in his bank accounts and had taken over a profitable gas station, a gift from Marcello. Another top assassination suspect, Dallas striptease club owner Jack Ruby. Now, this is where the letter is going to come into play that we're about to talk about, but he had concrete connections to the Marcello crime family, according to a 1979 report by the House assassination investigators. The report found that Jack Ruby was a friend and business associate of Joseph Savello, Marcello's top deputy in Dallas. So Jack Ruby's in Dallas, Jack's in Dallas, Jack's from Texas, like all of this Texas relation. Ruby was also very close to Joe Campisi, considered to be the number 2 man in the Dallas mafia hierarchy. Campisi was on such good terms with Marcello that he sent the Marcello family 260 pounds of homemade sausage every Christmas. Pretty darn good friends. Ruby met with 4 New Orleans nightclub operators and Marcello associates in June and October of 1963, and Ruby made a telephone call on October 30th of 1963 to the New Orleans office of Marcello gang member Nofio Pecora, whose associate, Emily Bruneau, had bailed Lee Harvey Oswald out of jail that summer. So, wow, we can see how that all kind of neatly fits itself into one little nut. It is now known that Ruby was not only a police-protected pot dealer, but a government informant. In 1947, he was a secret syndicate source for a young congressman from California named Richard Nixon. In 1950, he covertly cooperated with Senate committee probing organized crime. In 1956, according to newly released memos, the FBI fingered him as a liaison between the Dallas Police Department and local drug dealers. So, again, we're going to see a letter that is written to the Dallas Police Department. Identified by Warren Commission as the lone killer of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald had his own ties to Carlos Marcello. In New Orleans, where Oswald spent significant portions of his life, Oswald's uncle and substitute father was Charles Dutz Moret, an important bookie in Marcello's gambling operations. Oswald's mom, Marguerite, dated some of Marcello's employees. So here we have not only a tie to Jack Ruby with Oswald, but a tie to Marcello. Jack Ruby stalked Oswald after his arrest, finally killing him with a pistol shot to the guts 2 days after Kennedy's murder, as the alleged presidential assassin was being transferred from one Dallas jail to another. So Jack Ruby shooting Oswald, that's where the letter comes into play. And then, of course, this happened 2 days after. The letter we're going to see is in December 3rd. I want to say roughly about 12 to 13 days after the incident of Jack Ruby shooting Oswald. So shortly after entering the White House in 1969, Richard Nixon moved to solidify his close favor trading friendship with Carlos Marcello, known in the underworld. So we're going to hear about underworld in the communications, underworld and syndicate. These are the things that are bringing me to the point that Jack was involved with something much larger than himself. Known in the underworld as the Big Daddy of the Big Easy. Their main go-between was old Nixon loyalist and mob lawyer Murray Schottner, which, by the way, we kept talking about Melvin Belli and his disbarred partners, F. Lee Bailey and Kevin McLean. Melvin Belli was actually who represented Jack Ruby in the murder of Oswald. So Schottner had a White House official and an official government job from which to trade on his powerful behind-the-scenes influence. And that's what I'm finding. Many of these CIA agents, they actually worked for things like gas stations and oil stations and in the police department, in the fire department, in the newspaper. You could find them placed just about anywhere so that they had always the in and the know on the latest information that was coming in, or in the in the event that they were working for a gas station or an oil station or something like that, it is a very menial job where if they had to leave to take on a contract or a task or to do something for the mob or for the politicians, they could easily up and walk away from that job and it could be manned by somebody else very simply. So he had served Nixon since the Navy vet's very first campaign for Congress in 1946. In fact, Schottner had introduced Nixon to LA's top hoodlum Mickey Cohen and pressured Cohen to contribute to the Nixon campaign. Schottner was associated with scores of other leading gangsters, including Meyer Lansky and Ben Bugsy Siegel. When Schottner, on behalf of President Nixon, sought to aid Marcello, the gangster was facing a 2-year prison term for his 1968 conviction of assaulting a federal officer. Wow, of all the things that they could have been convicted of. Throughout Nixon's first 2 years in office, Marcello and his lawyer used all the clout they could muster with the administration to get Marcello's sentence cut. Nixon's crooked Attorney General John Mitchell finally put the squeeze on a federal judge to slice Marcello's prison term to 6 months and arranged for him to spend that time at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Now we see Springfield coming up. Mitchell was the first person since the FBI was established in 1908 to hold the office of Attorney General without undergoing an FBI investigation, thanks to a special request made by Nixon to his ever-loyal crony J. Edgar Hoover. And again, we hear both of these individuals being called out by the suspect. In 1979, Mitchell himself was found guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and perjury, and sentenced to 2.5 to 8 years in prison for his role in the Watergate break-in and cover-up. So all of this stuff is just going to keep making itself a nice little circle around things. So Marcello emerged from his term at Springfield in March of 1971, just in time to aid Schottner's effort to spring Jimmy Hoffa from prison. At about the same time, President Nixon, perhaps in part to aid Marcello's illegal drug trafficking business, ignored a call by a blue ribbon presidential commission to decriminalize marijuana. Wow. Well, that decision has startling repercussions. I actually found it interesting. Some of the research I did on the marijuana trafficking and the happenstance of it becoming illegal really was kind of one of those efforts that was forced or at least pushed very heavily by William Randolph Hearst, who is the media magnate of many of the newspapers around the United States. And of course, that is because the hemp that was created by this plant could produce faster and more supplies for paper and things of that nature. And of course, that ate into the money that Hearst could make by using actual trees for paper and so forth. So he was a big proponent of getting that shut down as an illegal substance back in the early 1900s. And of course, they had it taxed so heavily, it made it almost impossible for farmers to farm the hemp. On and on, we can see how these individuals are creating laws that would help benefit them and their incomes. I'm not going to really go through much more of the particulars on Marcello at this point. We are kind of getting an idea of who he is. I will say, though, in short, in 1979, the House Assassinations Committee concluded that at least 2 shooters were involved in the JFK assassination, and that the most likely conspirators were Hoffa, Marcello, Trafficante, and Chicago Godfather Sam Giancana. These are a lot of the names that are coming up in some of the solves by Harriet Suchet, and we're going to speak to her week after next in regards to some of those solves, and we'll see how she came up with some of the information that appears as though the Zodiac killer is attempting to tell on these individuals or to state, I have this information, so you probably don't want to mess with me. There was a question, did Nixon himself know what his mafia and perhaps CIA friends were up to? Speaking with Haldeman on one of the newly released White House tapes, the 37th president dismissed the Warren Commission's lone killer finding as the greatest hoax that had ever been perpetuated. So if I read that correctly, One of Bobby Kennedy's top mob fighters, Ron Goldfarb, now concludes that the JFK assassination was the work of Hoffa, Traficante, and Marcello. Oswald was, as he claimed, a patsy. Neither I nor anyone knew how the mob recruited Oswald, but it was a mob touch to use someone to carry out its deadly assignments and then to kill that person to avoid detection. And that's a lot of what I seen in that movie yesterday was no loose ends, no loose ends. Then in 2009, a secret FBI informant exploded a verbal bombshell. Carlos Marcello once told him during a prison yard conversation, "I had the little bastard," referring to JFK, "killed. He was a thorn in my side." Now, of course, anybody could come back after the fact and say that. The fact of the matter is that nobody was arrested literally for this crime from the individuals that actually committed it, of course, because many people believe that Oswald was a patsy. Officer Tippett, like I said, was a doppelganger for JFK. So he had said to have been parked outside Oswald's home, like I'd indicated, and then ultimately shot. Or was he an unwitting victim to a conspiracy that his body was needed for? That's another story, another conspiracy within the JFK field. Either way, the Zodiac killer took credit for shooting a man in a parked car with a .38, just like I said. And the reason why I put all of this stuff ultimately together is because Jack has bragged about hunting on Lyndon B. Johnson's ranch and having a invitation to the wedding of Lyndon B. Johnson and his wife. So Jack has a direct affiliation with Lyndon B. Johnson, and a lot of the information that you'll hear floating around about JFK was that Lyndon B. Johnson was the person to benefit becoming president once JFK was shot. So after the death of E. Howard Hunt, also a little bit more information, because we do see E. Howard Hunt come up in some of the solves by Lawrence Swearingham, which we will see those solves at a later point. In 2007, John Hunt and David Hunt revealed that their father had recorded several claims about himself and others being involved in the JFK conspiracy. In April 2005 issue of Rolling Stone, John Hunt detailed a number of individuals implicated by his father, including Morales, as well as Lyndon B. Johnson, Cord Meyer, David Atlee Phillips, Frank Sturgis, William Harvey, and an assassin he termed French gunman Grassy Knoll, who some presumed was Lucien Sardy. Lucien Sardy was in prison in France at the time of the assassination, but a Corsican hitman, Jean Soutre, who came to New York on November 19th of 1963 and then left the country from Laredo, Texas on December 6th, is thought more likely to be the Sartre or Satre mentioned in Hunt's son's book. As the Corsican assassin allegedly contracted for the big event, the two sons allege that their father cut the information from his memoirs, American Spy, My Secret History in the CIA, Watergate, and Beyond. So now we can see, again, these things are still kind of tying themselves around the mob and politics to avoid possible perjury charges. According to Hunt's widow and other children, the two sons took advantage of Hunt's loss of lucidity by coaching and exploiting him for financial gain. Lyndon B. Johnson, again, I already mentioned Jack, hunted on his ranch and received a wedding invitation. That actually brings us to the letter here that we have been discussing for oh so long. December 3rd of 1963, the Oswald case letter mailed from Lancaster, California to the Dallas Police Department in Dallas, Texas. And the note says, Oswald case, check either Howard or Spencer, perhaps Howard Spencer, link Ruby with an arrow going backwards from Oswald to Ruby. So we have the mob, we have the CIA, and then we have Howard, which could very well be Howard Hunt. There's a good chance Jack could have collected this postcard while vanishing at the end of 1963, resulting in him going back to Texas, scouting his new place while being in on the JFK scene. This is Jack's phantom persona, show up, kill, and get out of town. This could be the opening kill to his next residence. It is my theory that just like the Zodiac killer claimed, he shot a man sitting in a car with a .38. My guess is that Jack knew about the JFK plans, and he could have been tasked with killing JFK's clone, Officer Tippett, to complete the cover-up of where the shot really came from that killed Kennedy. This is more than once that the serial killer has used a pre-made postcard. We had Black Dahlia, and Zodiac is said to have premeditated and would foretell of their crimes. of their crimes when I thought he was talking about past crimes. Hopefully this examination of the letters from one crime to the next from 1944 on will tell this exact same story. Examination of this handwriting yields that the author of the Zodiac killer letters is the author of this letter. And we are going to actually begin, it looks like we'll talk a little bit about some of the locations, and then get right into the handwriting examination next week. So I'm going to leave off here as this is about all we have time for. We will pick up with some of the information in regards to the JFK murder, some of the inconsistencies and consistencies of that crime and how it applies to Jack. So I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. We will see you next Friday for that handwriting examination, and we'll show you how the handwriting on that particular postcard is a match to the Zodiac and Jack. Everybody take care and have a nice weekend.
Oh,